Good morning. What a great day to worship and give praise to the true and living God. I'm Pastor E. Dale Worthy, and on behalf of the Fairfield Baptist Church, Auburn, Georgia, it's my good pleasure to welcome you to the Word today, our virtual worship service. I want to thank you for choosing to worship with us today as we continue to observe social distancing guidelines. We encourage you to like and share this broadcast so that the Word of God is spread to as many persons as possible. Also, go to our church's YouTube channel and subscribe if you haven't already. Finally, please consider partnering with our church financially so that we can continue to do ministry in the midst of these dual pandemics. You may do so via the Givelify app. Just search Fairfield Baptist Church Auburn and look for our picture. Or you may mail your gifts to Post Office Box 207, Auburn, Georgia, zip code 30011. Now let's join the Word today.
To Jeremiah chapter 29 and verse number 7 for the conclusion of this two-part message, which reads, "Seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper." Again, I want to conclude this two-part sermon, why you need your enemies and they need you too. Pray with me, if you will. Some time ago, a friend sent me an email that contained a reading called "Enemies as Emissaries of God's Grace." And rather than read you the entire piece, let me highlight it for you because I think it's going to bless us. Read this way: if I keep a heavenly perspective and believe Romans 8:28, enemies are not really enemies. They're some of the best friends that I have. What is sometimes meant by some to hurt me actually helps to bring about a work of grace in me that would not take place otherwise. When a supposed enemy attacks, God exposes the sinful blind spots that lie hidden in my heart. And when friends extol my good virtues and praise me, I appreciate their expressions of love, but it is more important that I be told the truth, especially when it will wound me deeply. Otherwise, I will not work to become more like Christ, and the blind spots that I have will grow and further infect my soul. There are lessons that I must learn that can only be learned in the crucible of adversity, pain, and difficulty. And God uses those perceived enemies to expose the things that otherwise would never be seen, much less understood or removed in my life. And so what some might call my enemies are really my best friends, and they're a helper, an emissary for God for my good. They help to navigate me to the cross and to Christ and to my realization of who I am in Him. And without people doing what they think will hurt or destroy me, I would never find the way to being more like Jesus. They are a required part of becoming holy, and because of that, I must see them as not only my friends, but my best friends. There is much more to the reading, but this little highlight gives you the flavor of the entire thing. The emphasis strikes me this morning as profoundly biblical. If you believe in God and His sovereignty over all circumstances in life, it's not enough to simply say we believe that God has a purpose in everything that happens to us. That much we know is true. But this reading suggests that God always has a beneficial purpose, though we often do not see it clearly. And with that in mind, we turn to the very practical question of how are we to respond to those who hurt us deeply? Jesus said, love your enemies. Easier said than done, especially when you're in the middle of an ugly conflict. And in the particular case of Jeremiah 29, the Jews had been forcibly deported from Jerusalem to Babylon, and many of their leaders had been killed, and many had been marched away in shackles and chains. The Babylonians were ruthless in the way they treated their enemies, and now the Jews were in exile for 70 years, which meant for the older folks, and most of them would never get to see home again. What does it mean to love the people who have ruined everything that you hold dear? How do you pray for someone that you despise? How do you seek the good of people that you wish were dead? How do you survive in this foreign land where everything you believe is ridiculed? Why would you seek their prosperity after what they did to you? Well, in part one of this message, we discussed two key points. Where do my enemies come from? And who are my enemies? I ended part one with these words. Of course, it's easier to talk about this abstractly. It is much harder to love our enemies on a daily basis. We are to love those who despitefully use us and abuse us and victimize us time after time. It's not easy to do this in any case, but it is much harder to love when we feel deeply and repeatedly violated and our trust has been destroyed. And yet, the command remains: love your enemies. Friend, we cannot escape it. This is a key part of our own spiritual journey from bitterness to forgiveness to freedom. To say it another way, we cannot be set free until we set them free to be blessed by God. We come now to the third and final question. How are we to love our enemies? I want to give you 7 suggestions that I just believe will move us in the right direction. Number 1, greet them. Yeah, greet your enemies. Oftentimes we overlook this simple step. One part of loving our enemies is to greet them graciously when we do see them. Sometimes, oftentimes perhaps, instead of turning the other cheek, we turn away so that we don't have to say hello or to somebody who hurt us. And some of us have become quite skilled at looking the other way, ducking, dodging in the other rooms, crossing the street, or even utilizing caller ID to keep from greeting those who've hurt us. But if we only greet our friends, then what benefit is that? Do not even sinners greet each other? One part of loving your enemies is to greet them instead of avoiding them. Number 2, and we're going to hurry through this, but not too hurriedly, disarm them. That's what you do when you turn the other cheek or go the extra mile. You disarm them by doing the very thing they least expect. You do it by speaking well of them when nobody expects it. Robert E. Lee was once asked his opinion of a fellow officer who was widely known as one of Lee's greatest detractors. Lee responded that he thought the man a very fine officer. General, his questioner, replied, "I guess you don't know what he's been saying about you." Lee replied, "Oh yes, I do. But I was asked my opinion of him, not his opinion of me." Number 3, do good to them. Doing good to your enemies means seeing beyond your pain and their meanness to their humanity. It means seeing them as people made in the image of God and understanding that there is something twisted inside that causes them to do what they do. Doing good means that you do what will promote their healing despite the way that they've treated you. The idea is this: you make the first move, you send the email, you pick up the phone, you make the first contact, you bridge the gap, you set up the appointment. Met a man once who had a great gift of sharing Jesus with others. He has his knack of saying the right thing at the right time so that people are eager to know more about Jesus. And I asked him what was his secret. He said 4 keys being used by God to help others: show up, hang loose, trust God, and stay alert. Those same 4 keys will work for you if you want to help those who've hurt you. Number 4, and we're moving right along, refuse to speak evil of them. That's what Jesus meant when he said, bless those who curse you. It means you choose not to think evil thoughts and you refuse to speak evil words against those who have wronged you. Proverbs has a lot to say about the power of words. The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. Every time we open our mouths, life or death comes out. I'm increasingly impressed with the thought that forgiveness in many cases is not possible because we can't stop talking. As long as we talk over and over and over again about how others have hurt us, we will never find the strength to forgive. And at some point we have to stop talking and start forgiving. You can criticize the Babylonians, or you can pray for them. But you can't do both at the same time. As long as we talk over and over about how others have hurt us, we will never find the strength to forgive them. And at some point, we have to stop talking, start forgiving. We will never seek the good of the city as long as we hate the people of that city. What God said to the exiles applies directly to us. We will never seek the good of our enemies until we stop speaking evil of them. Number 5 is going to throw many for a loop, but you ought to thank God for your enemies. You believe in the sovereignty of God. We must believe that our enemies are sent by God's design and with God's approval. Your enemy could not torment you apart from God's permission. Behind your enemy stands the hand of Almighty God, and God would never permit it if he didn't intend to bring something good out of it. You should take a picture of your enemy, frame it, and put it on your refrigerator, and thank God for your enemy every time you look at it. 6, and we're almost done here. Pray for your enemies. Martin Niemöller, German pastor, was arrested by the Nazis in World War II. He prayed daily from his prison cell for his captors. And other prisoners would ask why he was praying for those who were his enemies. His response was, "Do you know anyone who needs your prayers more than your enemies? But what if you hate the person you're praying for? Tell that to the Lord. He won't be surprised. Then say something like this: Lord, I hate this person, but you already knew that. I ask you to love this person through me because I can't do it in my own power. I'm asking you, God, for a love that I don't have and can't begin to produce. God will not turn you away when you come with an honest heart, admitting you need his love to flow through you. And finally, ask God to bless your enemies. Here's a simple way to do that. When faced with someone who has mistreated you, ask God to do for them what you want God to do for you. Seek the blessing for them that you want God to do for you. And think of it this way: the greater the hurt, the greater the potential blessing that will come when we forgive from the heart, and by God's grace, bless those who curse us. Let me try to put it in a broader perspective. Let's suppose you find yourself in Babylon right now. Perhaps you feel forgotten, overlooked, downtrodden, misused, and taken for granted. Maybe you don't like where you are or the people around you. And if that's the case, then join the crowd, because most people feel that way at one time or another, and some of us have taken up permanent residence there. So here's the question: how is God going to reach Babylon? Friend, his method has been the same throughout all history. God reaches the lost by sending his people to the lost. But what if they don't want to go? Short answer is he sends them anyway. That's what he did with Jonah. And that's what he did with the Jewish exiles. By putting them in the hands of the people they hated, the Lord was really saying, you are my missionaries in Babylon. Though I put you there as a punishment, I also intend for you to be a blessing to your captors. That's a remarkable, uplifting, encouraging thought, because it means that even when we have really messed up, and when we are suffering badly for our mistake, God continues to use us so that even our discipline becomes an opportunity not only for spiritual growth, but for ministry to others. Friends, that is liberating. That is revolutionary. That is incredible. And that is our great God. But you'll never enter into that missionary experience until you begin to bless your enemies. Let me offer this final word and I'll leave you alone. Your enemy is a gift from God to you. Though you don't know it and often can't see it, the person who has hurt you so deeply is a gift from God to you. To say that is not to excuse evil or to condone mistreatment. It is to say exactly what Joseph meant when he said to his brothers, you meant it for evil against me, but God meant it for the good. Our enemies humble us. They keep us on our knees. They reveal our weaknesses and they expose our total need for God. Just as David needed Saul to pursue him, to persecute him, and to repeatedly attempt to take his life, we need the enemies God sends to us. If we didn't need him, he wouldn't keep sending them. Therefore, we thank God who knows best, and we love our enemies the best we can. Often God raises up an enemy to see if you really want to be like Jesus. He'll keep sending and keep enemies alive and well as long as we need them. Don't forget now, Jesus had enemies. And Jesus' enemies killed him. But he loved them anyway. Let me ask you this morning, do you really want to be like Jesus? I'm closing when I tell you in 1957, Martin Luther King Jr. preached on loving your enemies at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. As he came to the end of his message, he said, there is a little tree planted on a little hill, and on that tree hangs the most influential person who ever came into this world. In the cross of Christ, the love of God has broken through into human history. Now we know what love looks like in a world filled with hatred, distrust, bitterness, mistreatment, and abuse. As the hymn writer said, see from his head, his hands, his feet, sorrow and love flow mingled down. It is a message from God that love is the only way. It's the only way to heaven, and it's the only way to live on earth. If you believe in Jesus at all, we must say to our enemies, I love you. I would rather die than to hate you. When Jesus walks with us, we will find strength to love our enemies, to bless those who curse us, and pray for those who despitefully use us. Don't get even with your enemies. Ask God to bless them instead. If you can let go of your anger long enough to pray like this, then you will discover a wonderful benefit. When you pray for grace for others, then at the same time you also put yourself in a position to receive grace yourself. So here is a new reason to pray for your enemies. Your blessing depends on their prosperity. God bless you, God keep you is our prayer. And until next week, keep on growing in grace.